India is emerging as a new world superpower.
India will be the third largest economy soon.
India has made history by becoming the first nation to land near the moon's south pole.
But alarm bells are going off in the nation of over 1 billion people. Crackdowns, internet blackouts, and communal violence are on the rise. So what's actually going on in the country? And is it time to worry about the so-called largest democracy in the world?
There is a systemic way in which violence is being perpetuated and it's deepening and it's spreading. Modi's turned India into a very dangerous place.
Here's the thing. It isn't just the way in which Indian democracy is changing that is causing alarm. It's also the ideology behind what is happening that's causing worry.
Basically, under Modi, the country has been reshaped in the image of the Hindu majority. And some would say that this is authoritarianism. Some would say it's a kind of ethnic democracy or ethnocracy, which means one ethnicity kind of controlling the political space. But whatever it is not a democracy.
India's system is technically a liberal democracy. The 1949 Constitution of India was drafted along principles of secularism and equality, stating, quote, "The state shall not discriminate against any citizen on grounds only of religion, race, caste, sex, place of birth, or any of them." But when the BJP and its predecessors came to power, that began to change. The BJP is a Hindu nationalist party built on the ideology of Hindutva. And Hindutva imagines India as a Hindu-first nation. That's worrying for the millions of religious minorities living in the country. The first major step toward a Hindu nation didn't go after the basic mechanics of democracy, like how Indians vote. But it aimed at the stuff that makes it all work, like the independent judiciary and freedom of speech. Courts in India under the Indian Constitution are separate from the other branches of government. But some say that Modi and his allies are trying to call the shots in the courts. For example, by increasing their control over the judicial collegium system of appointments, refusing to appoint judges they don't approve of, or stalling opponents' complaints in the country's court backlog of over 50 million cases. Or the passing of the Citizenship Amendment Act, also known as CAA, which provoked nationwide protests. The CAA has been called anti-Muslim since it only provides Indian citizenship for non-Muslim immigrants from neighboring countries. It was one of Parliament's first acts to use religion as a criterion, which critics say makes it illegal under the Constitution. Ultimately, critics are concerned that by bending the courts to its will, the BJP is setting India on a dangerous path, where one party gets to call all the shots with little to no pushback and little to no way of reversing the damage done.
The political dispensation is irresponsible or tries to abuse power. You look up to the judiciary as the North Star, and that really isn't existing. Democracy is more than just the right to vote and the ability of a nation to elect their leader democratically. It also means democracy cannot exist without accountability mechanisms which are not existing right now.
The CAA is just part of a bigger problem that's threatening India: increased violence against the many millions who are religious minorities in the country.
The space for being anything but Hindu in India has become extremely small. This has played out in terms of mobs entering Muslim neighborhoods, Christian neighborhoods, chanting songs, calling for genocide, calling for ethnic cleansing. It's created a lot of anxiety amongst people who are not Hindu in the society. It's very similar to Israel, and India is sort of fast moving towards that type of apartheid system.
Hindus make up about 80% of India's population. Muslims make up about 14%. That's about 200 million people. And around 50 million people, that's about 4% of the population, identify as either Christian or Sikh. In almost every aspect of public life, like education, jobs, and housing, Muslims have been systematically marginalized. Since 2014, hate speech has risen 400%, with some Hindu leaders calling for genocide to rid India of its 200 million Muslims.
Modi's government, and particularly Modi and some of his close associates who are ruling, they usually do not make these hate speeches themselves. They have encouraged vigilante mobs. They have encouraged a large section of vigilante leaders who through their platforms make these hate speeches and promote violence within the society.
Mobs operating under the guise of protecting Hindu cultural or religious values have been responsible for a series of violent and often fatal attacks across the country. A 2019 Human Rights Watch report documented 44 murders, 36 of which were Muslims, from May 2015 to December 2018 by mobs who killed people in the name of so-called cow protection. Many Hindus consider cows to be sacred.
Azad says the BJP is using a repetitive model in the states it has managed to win and govern.
And that is creating divides in society. So going in and creating rifts between Muslims and Hindus, creating rifts between Christians and Hindus, and then kind of taking the side of the Hindu majority, right? And then making it clear that as the BJP, they are going to support that community. So then basically this kind of rift becomes sort of like institutionalized. It becomes very clear that if you are going to stand up against the BJP, you're going to get squashed. So eventually everyone starts moving towards the BJP because they have no other choice.
Which brings us to this.
Since May 2023, at least 150 people have been killed in ethnic violence between the Hindu Meitei majority and the mainly Christian Kuki minority in Manipur.
That's a BJP-led remote state in northeast India with a history of tribal conflict. More than 60,000 people have fled their homes, with many seeking refuge in relief shelters or neighboring states. BJP state authorities in Manipur have been accused by Human Rights Watch of enabling the conflict with policies that fuel Hindu majoritarianism and create division. The government has been imposing internet shutdowns, making it difficult for information to flow out of the state. In fact, the Indian government conducts the most internet shutdowns in the world. And it isn't a coincidence. Activists say Modi's administration relentlessly targets anyone who dares criticize the Prime Minister's Hindutva agenda. It's also a way to prevent information getting out that may cast the government in a negative light. More than 7,000 people were charged with sedition between 2014 and 2020, and charges under the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act, also known as UAPA, accounted for more than 8,000 arrests between 2015 and 2020. The UAPA is an anti-terrorism law that allows the government to label someone as a terrorist and arrest them without any incriminating evidence. Rights groups say Modi's administration mainly uses these laws to suppress dissent among activists, as well as journalists. This leads us to the crackdown on media and journalists specifically. And this is important because when you repress the media, you stifle the institution that is supposed to hold power accountable. Kashmir is an example of how the Indian government targets journalists.
Media has been systemically silenced much before the crackdown in rest of India began. And that's been happening for a long time, but post 2019 when Kashmir's autonomy was eroded completely, the media has been facing a huge crackdown. First there was the internet shutdown, and then there have been things like surveillance. Journalists are summoned to police stations for any critical word. Several of them have been arrested. 4 of them continue to be under arrest. Some activists have been arrested. So anybody who can speak, those voices are being arrested or criminal cases are being slapped.
This isn't just happening in Kashmir though. In the past year alone, Modi's government has sent tax officials to raid the BBC's offices in New Delhi and Mumbai after they released a documentary critical of Modi, established a panel that internet rights groups fear could remove social media posts critical of the government.
We're talking about a very insecure government that's highly invested in their PR, as well as extremely nervous about the way they are projected in the press.
Some say Modi uses spirituality as a way to build an image in the West.
And so it takes a concept like yoga, right? And it presents India as kind of exceptional, as being very close to spirituality, as being enlightened. This kind of creates a cover for its egregious sort of domestic policies. Because how would you imagine a country and a leader that does yoga in public and that leads people in yoga exercises that could also be an authoritarian?
So just to recap, the integrity of institutions like the courts is being eroded, Non-Hindu Indians are facing increased discrimination and violence. There are deliberate crackdowns on activists and dissenting voices. Media and journalists critical of the Indian government risk retaliation. And this has been years in the making. Remember, the BJP has been in power for almost 10 years. India is this year's host of the G20, a summit comprised of 20 of the largest economies on the planet.
India is now considered a crucial ally in the economic war with China. This is a very dangerous situation for Indian Muslims, for Christians, for Kashmiris, for Dalits in India, because India is now seen as an economic powerhouse and an important economic partner to the West, which means that they will now turn a blind eye to whatever the Indian state does in the interim.